Have you ever felt like God's plan for your life was delayed? Like the promises He's given you seem out of reach, and the waiting is taking longer than you expected? You're not alone. I've been there myself, and I know that feeling of wondering why things are taking so long. But let me tell you something today that I believe will bring you peace. Because God's plan seems delayed doesn't mean it's denied. His timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't make sense to us. We live in a world that thrives on instant gratification. We want things now. We want answers now. We want our plans to unfold according to our timeline. And when they don't, it's easy to get discouraged, frustrated, and even question God's faithfulness. We wonder, why is this taking so long? Has God forgotten about me? Is He still working in my life? But in these moments, God is teaching us something powerful about His timing and how we can trust Him in the process. In Scripture, there are countless stories of individuals who had to wait on God's timing. Stories that remind us that delay doesn't mean denial. Think of Abraham, for example. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, yet he had to wait years and years before that promise was fulfilled. He was already in his 90s when the long-awaited miracle of Isaac was born. Can you imagine how he must have felt during those long years of waiting? The doubt, the questions, the uncertainty. But God's timing was perfect, and in the end, Abraham saw the fulfillment of God's promise in a way that was beyond anything he could have imagined. Then there's the story of Joseph, a young man who was sold into slavery by his own brothers. He found himself in a foreign land, in a position of great suffering and uncertainty. It seemed like everything was falling apart, and his dreams were slipping away. Yet, God was working behind the scenes. Every setback Joseph experienced was part of God's perfect plan to elevate him to a position of great influence, to save nations from famine, and to fulfill the promises God had made to him years earlier. In the end, Joseph was able to say, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. What a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, God's timing is always at work. We also see in the life of Jesus that God's timing is perfect. In John 11, when Jesus was told that his friend Lazarus was sick, he didn't immediately rush to his side. In fact, he delayed his visit for 2 more days. The disciples and the people around Jesus didn't understand this delay. They questioned his decision to wait. But when Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. Yet in this moment of seeming delay, Jesus performed one of the most remarkable miracles in his ministry. He raised Lazarus from the dead. In that moment, Jesus revealed that God's timing isn't just about meeting our expectations, but about showing His glory in ways we never thought possible. He was preparing the stage for something greater than anyone had imagined. Now you may be wondering, but what does this mean for me? What do I do when it feels like God's plan for my life is delayed? First of all, understand that God is never in a hurry. He's not rushing to meet your timeline. His plan is unfolding according to His purpose, and His purpose is always good. When we face delays, it's a reminder that God is in control, not us. His ways are higher than our ways, and His timing is always perfect. Second, delay is often a part of God's process of preparation. God is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine, and He uses the waiting to refine your character, to strengthen your faith, and to help you grow in dependence on Him. Think about a farmer waiting for the harvest. He doesn't rush the process. He waits for the right time, and he trusts that in due season the fruit will come. Similarly, God is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it, to bring about something beautiful in our lives. Third, when God seems to delay, it's important to remember that waiting doesn't mean inactivity. While you're waiting, you're not sitting idly by. God calls you to trust, to pray, to serve, and to continue following Him in obedience. Waiting is an active process. It's not passive. It's a time to grow in faith, to strengthen your relationship with God, and to continue living out His will for your life. Just because the answer hasn't come yet doesn't mean that God isn't at work in your life. There's a powerful verse in Isaiah 40:31 that reminds us of God's perspective on waiting. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. When we wait on God, we are not waiting in vain. We are waiting with purpose. And in the waiting, God strengthens us, renews us, and prepares us for the future He has for us. Finally, remember that God's delays are not denials. When it feels like His plan is delayed, it's simply because God's timing is different from ours. He sees the bigger picture and He knows what's best for us. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good and His glory. His plan is perfect, even when we don't understand it. Trust in His timing because He is faithful and He will never fail you. So the next time you find yourself waiting, when it feels like God's plan for your life is delayed, remember that His timing is perfect. He is working behind the scenes. He is preparing you for something greater, and He will fulfill His promises to you in His perfect time. God's perfect timing is something that's difficult to understand, especially in a world that constantly urges us to act quickly, to rush toward our goals, and to seize every opportunity immediately. But the truth is, God's timeline is not like our own. His ways and thoughts are higher than ours, and He often works in ways that we don't immediately comprehend. The Bible reminds us time and time again that God's delays are never denials, and His timing is always for our benefit, even when it feels as though we're stuck in a waiting room of life. I want you to understand something today. When God seems to delay His promises in your life, it's not because He's forgotten about you. It's not because He's ignoring your prayers or doesn't care about your struggles. The delay is part of the process. It's part of God's perfect plan to help you grow, trust, and mature in your faith. He knows exactly what you need, and He knows exactly when you need it. But often it's during these times of waiting that God does His most significant work in us. Let's look back at the lives of some of the most faithful individuals in the Bible. Abraham, the father of faith, waited for a promise from God that seemed impossible to fulfill. God told Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, yet for years he and his wife Sarah remained childless. As they grew older, it seemed as though the promise was slipping further and further away. But in God's perfect timing, when it seemed impossible, Isaac was born. It wasn't just a child being born, it was the fulfillment of God's promise, and it came in the most miraculous way. Abraham's faith was tested, but it was in the waiting, in the delay, that Abraham's trust in God deepened. Think about Joseph, who received a dream from God when he was just a young man, a dream in which he saw his brothers bowing down to him. Joseph, filled with youthful enthusiasm, shared this dream, and his brothers became jealous. They sold him into slavery, and for years Joseph's life seemed to spiral downward. He went from being a favored son to being a slave and then to a prisoner. The dream God had given him seemed impossible. The delay was long, the suffering was real, but all the while God was at work. God was shaping Joseph's character. God was preparing him for the moment when he would be elevated to a position of power in Egypt, a position from which he would save many lives during a time of famine. In the delay, God was doing something in Joseph's life that he could not have understood at the time. And when the time came, Joseph was ready. And God's plan unfolded in ways that he never could have imagined. The same truth applies to us today. When God delays the fulfillment of His promises in our lives, it is not a punishment, nor is it a sign that He's abandoned us. It is simply a sign that God is still working, preparing, and shaping us for something greater. Just as the delay in Abraham's life produced Isaac, and the delay in Joseph's life prepared him for his destiny, the delay in your life is preparing you for what God has in store for you. We live in a culture of instant gratification, but God is not bound by the clock. His timing is not dictated by human schedules. The Bible tells us that with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. 2 Peter 3:8. God sees everything from an eternal perspective, and what seems like a delay to us is merely a step in the process of His divine plan. We may not understand it, but we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, even when we don't see it. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Perhaps you've been waiting for a breakthrough in your career, a relationship to be restored, or for healing in your body. The waiting can be discouraging. It can make you question whether God really hears your prayers. But I want to encourage you today to trust in His timing. God is not delaying because He wants to hurt you or because He has forgotten about you. No, he is delaying because he loves you too much to give you something before you're ready for it. He's preparing you for what lies ahead. He's teaching you patience, perseverance, and trust. Consider the story of David, a young shepherd boy who was anointed by God to be king. David was anointed while he was still a boy, and yet it would be years before he actually took the throne. During that time, he faced incredible opposition, including being hunted by the current king, Saul. David had to wait, and there were times when it seemed like God had forgotten his promise to make David king. But during those years of waiting, David grew in strength, wisdom, and trust in God. He learned to depend on God for protection, provision, and guidance. And when the time was right, when David had been shaped and refined, God elevated him to the throne. The delay didn't deny the promise. It refined David so that he could rule wisely and lead God's people in the way they needed. One of the most powerful aspects of waiting on God is that it develops our relationship with Him. When things aren't happening the way we expect, we are forced to lean on God more deeply. Our prayers become more sincere, and our trust in Him grows. We learn to hear His voice more clearly and to follow His leading more faithfully. We may not always understand why God is waiting, but we can trust that He is always with us, guiding us and preparing us for the future. God's delay is not a sign of denial. It's a sign of His love and faithfulness. In the moments when we feel that God has forgotten about us, He's actually drawing us closer to Himself. He's teaching us to trust in His perfect timing, to wait with hope, and to surrender our will to His. Trusting in God's timing means trusting that He knows what's best for us, and that He has a plan far greater than we could ever imagine. When we trust in Him, we can rest assured that the delay is not a denial, but a preparation for something greater. So if you're in a season of waiting today, I want to encourage you to hold on. Don't give up. Don't lose heart. God is working even when you can't see it. His perfect plan is unfolding in your life, and His timing will prove to be perfect in the end. Trust Him. Trust His timing. And when the breakthrough comes, you will look back and see that God's plan was worth the wait. When we find ourselves in the midst of a delay, it's easy to grow frustrated, to question whether God is still with us or whether He truly cares about our situation. We may start to wonder if our prayers are falling on deaf ears or if our hopes are being postponed indefinitely. But I want you to understand something. Just because things are delayed, it doesn't mean God has abandoned you. In fact, the delay is a part of His plan. God is never early, but He is never late. His timing is always perfect. It's when we learn to trust in that perfect timing that we begin to experience peace in the midst of our waiting. Think of the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. God promised them a land of milk and honey, a land flowing with abundance. But instead of leading them directly to this promised land, God led them through a long and difficult journey. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years. 40 years! That's an entire generation. And during that time, they faced challenges, hardships, and moments of doubt. They questioned God's plan. They wondered why God had allowed them to be stuck in the wilderness for so long. But you see, God wasn't just delivering them from Egypt. He was also shaping them into a people who could handle the promise that He had for them. God knew that the promise He had made to them would require more than just a quick trip from point A to point B. It would take time for them to grow, to learn, and to be prepared for what was ahead. You may be in a wilderness of your own today. You may be wondering why God hasn't answered your prayers yet. You may feel as though you're stuck in a cycle of waiting, and the promise seems to be getting farther and farther away. But I want to remind you that God is doing something in your life during this waiting period. He is shaping you. He is refining you. He is building your faith, your patience, and your trust in Him. You may not see it now, but every step you take in faith during the waiting is preparing you for the moment when God's promise will be fulfilled. Think of a time when you were waiting for something, maybe a promotion, a breakthrough in your personal life, or a prayer to be answered. How did you respond during that time of waiting? It's easy to become impatient and discouraged, isn't it? But I want to challenge you today to change your perspective. Instead of seeing your delay as a setback, start to see it as God's opportunity to grow you. When God delays His plan, it's often because He's protecting you, preparing you, and making sure that you're ready for the blessing that lies ahead. The Bible speaks of a time in Jesus' life when he experienced a delay in answering a prayer. In the Gospel of John, we read about a time when Jesus' close friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, were in desperate need of his help. Lazarus was gravely ill, and Mary and Martha sent for Jesus, hoping he would come immediately to heal their brother. But instead of rushing to their side, Jesus deliberately stayed where he was for 2 more days. By the time he arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had died. It must have been heartbreaking for Mary and Martha to wonder why Jesus hadn't come sooner. They had prayed, they had believed, but the answer to their prayers seemed delayed. Yet in that moment of delay, Jesus did something incredible. He raised Lazarus from the dead, and in doing so, he demonstrated his power over death itself. The delay wasn't a denial. It was part of God's plan to reveal his glory in a way that would strengthen the faith of all who witnessed it. Jesus' delay wasn't a sign of indifference. It was a sign of his divine purpose. The same is true for you today. When God seems silent, when he seems distant, it's not because he's forgotten you. He is using this time to work behind the scenes, preparing something greater than you could ever imagine. And when the time is right, he will make himself known in ways you never expected. Sometimes the hardest part of waiting is the uncertainty. We don't always know why God's plan is delayed, or why certain doors seem to close while others remain locked. But that's where trust comes in. Trusting God in the delay means surrendering our timeline to his. It means trusting that his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. Isaiah 55:9. It means understanding that while we may not see the whole picture, God does. He knows what's best for us even when we can't see it. He knows what we need even when we think we have everything figured out. One of the keys to trusting in God's perfect timing is learning to rest in his promises. When you find yourself in a season of waiting, I encourage you to immerse yourself in God's word. His promises are unchanging and steadfast, and they will give you the strength to keep moving forward. Psalm 27:14 says, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." This is a reminder that while waiting may feel difficult, it is not wasted. God is doing something in us during the wait. He is strengthening our hearts, building our endurance, and refining our character. God is never in a hurry, and his timing is always perfect. The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3:11 that God has made everything beautiful in its time. Even when things seem delayed, God is working behind the scenes. He's preparing the right circumstances, the right people, and the right moment for you to step into his plan for your life. And when that moment comes, it will be worth the wait. As you navigate through life's delays, remember this: God's delays are not denials. They are opportunities for growth, for deepening your faith, and for trusting in his perfect plan. Just as God's timing in the wilderness led the Israelites to the promised land, just as Jesus' delay led to the resurrection of Lazarus, your waiting is leading you to something far greater than you can imagine. So hold fast to your faith, trust in his perfect timing, and know that when God's plan is revealed, it will be more than worth the wait. When you are waiting on God's timing, it can feel as though the clock is ticking in slow motion. The minutes stretch into hours, the hours into days, into months, or even years. You might wonder, why is God taking so long? Why hasn't he answered my prayers yet? And let me tell you, these feelings of impatience and frustration are not uncommon. We all face moments of doubt, moments when God's plan seems delayed, and we wonder if we've been forgotten. But in those very moments, I want to remind you of something that you may not always consider. God's delays are not mistakes. They are part of a bigger, more beautiful picture that we can't always see from where we are standing. You see, God is not like us. We live in a world that runs on deadlines, appointments, and timetables. We rush through life, often measuring success by how fast we can accomplish something. But God is not bound by time. He created time itself. His timetable is different from ours, and it's important to understand that his delays are not a sign of failure or neglect. Instead, his delays are an invitation to trust him more deeply and to believe in his perfect timing. Let's consider the story of Abraham and Sarah, a powerful reminder of how God's timing is not always our own. God made Abraham a promise. He would make him the father of many nations, but there was a problem. Abraham and Sarah were old, really old. They had been married for many years, but they had no children. And yet God's promise was clear. He told Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, Genesis 15:5. But year after year after year, Abraham and Sarah waited, and nothing seemed to happen. The promise didn't seem to be coming to pass. In their frustration and impatience, Sarah made a decision that would affect their lives forever. She suggested that Abraham have a child with her servant Hagar in an attempt to help God's plan along. But this decision did not bring about the fulfillment of God's promise. In fact, it caused a great deal of pain and conflict in their lives. You see, trying to rush God's plan always leads to trouble. But even in their mistakes, God remained faithful. He had a plan that was far greater than they could imagine. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, God fulfilled his promise and gave them a son, Isaac. The timing was nothing short of miraculous, but it was also perfect. Had God given them a child when they first hoped for one, they would not have been able to fully appreciate the greatness of his promise. Their faith was tested and refined over those many years of waiting, and in the end they were able to see God's hand at work in a way they could never have imagined. Abraham and Sarah's story teaches us an invaluable lesson about trusting God's timing. Their delay wasn't a denial of God's promise. It was a test of their faith. It was an opportunity for God to prove that He alone could make what seemed impossible possible. And let me tell you, that same God is at work in your life today. You may not see it now, but in the waiting, God is doing something powerful. He is working behind the scenes, aligning people, circumstances, and timing in ways you cannot understand at this moment. I want to encourage you today. When you face delays in your own life, don't give up. Don't think that God has forgotten you or that He has abandoned His plan for you. His timing is not like ours, but it is always perfect. What He is doing in your life during this period of waiting is just as important as the promise you are waiting for. Just as gold must be refined in fire, so too must our faith be refined in the furnace of waiting. And when God's perfect timing comes to pass, it will be more beautiful than anything you could have imagined. Remember the words of Isaiah 55:8-9, where God says that for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. God is not confined by the same limits we are. His plan is greater and His purpose is beyond our understanding. You may wonder why things aren't happening as quickly as you'd like, but God sees the bigger picture. He is orchestrating every detail of your life. And while it may feel like things are delayed, they are actually unfolding in the way they are supposed to. As you continue to trust in God's timing, I urge you to resist the temptation to rush ahead or take matters into your own hands. I know it's easy to feel like you have to make something happen, to push forward when it feels like nothing is moving. But remember, when we try to force God's hand, we can often create more problems than solutions. Trust Him in the waiting. Trust that He knows what He is doing. Trust that His plan for you is far better than anything you could orchestrate on your own. There will be times in your life when God's plan seems delayed, and it may be hard to understand. But I assure you, this is a part of His divine wisdom. We have to remember that God is not just working on our behalf in the physical realm. He is working in the spiritual realm as well. While we may be focused on the here and now, God is preparing us for something much greater that lies ahead. He is refining our hearts, building our character, and preparing us for the blessings that are yet to come. In the waiting, God is working. There's a beautiful verse in Psalm 27:14 that says, "Await for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." This verse reminds us that waiting is not a passive experience. It is an active, courageous choice to trust in God's timing, to continue to believe in His promises, and to hold on to the hope that He will come through for us when the time is right. I know that waiting can feel like a test of endurance. But remember, it is also an opportunity to build a deeper relationship with God. It is in the waiting that we learn to depend on Him fully. And it is in the waiting that we find the strength to carry on, knowing that His timing is perfect and that He will fulfill every promise He has made to us. So let me encourage you today. No matter how long the wait, trust in God's perfect timing. He has a plan for your life that is greater than anything you could ever imagine. And when His plan unfolds, you will see that it was worth every moment of waiting. As you continue your journey through life, waiting on God's timing, there will be moments when doubt will creep in. You may ask yourself, has God forgotten me? Why is he taking so long to answer my prayers? In those moments, I want to remind you of one important truth. God is never late. His timing may seem different from ours, but it is always perfect. His delay is not a denial, and his promises are sure. As we dig deeper into this truth, I want to help you understand why the waiting process is not wasted. It is in these times of waiting that God is working in ways you may not see, preparing you for the future he has for you. The Bible gives us countless examples of individuals who had to wait for God's promises. One of the most well-known figures is Joseph, whose story is one of perseverance through delay and suffering. When we first meet Joseph in Genesis 37, he is a young man with a bright future. He is his father Jacob's favorite son, and his dreams of greatness, symbolized by the coat of many colors, provoke the jealousy of his brothers. They plot to kill him, but ultimately they sell him into slavery. For the next 13 years, Joseph experiences betrayal, false accusations, imprisonment, and loneliness. It seems as though everything is going wrong, and his dreams are nothing more than a distant memory. Yet despite the delays, God was at work in Joseph's life. His time in prison was not wasted. It was in that very place that Joseph's character was refined. His faith was strengthened, and God was preparing him for the role he would eventually play in saving not only his family, but the entire nation of Egypt from a devastating famine. Joseph's journey was long, difficult, and filled with suffering, but when the time was right, God elevated him to a position of power and authority. When Joseph finally stood before Pharaoh, he had a clarity of purpose that could only come from the trials he had endured. And Joseph knew that it was God's perfect timing that had brought him to that moment. He said in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph's story teaches us a profound lesson about trusting God's timing. He didn't understand why he had to go through such hardships, but he trusted that God was at work in his life. He knew that his suffering was not in vain. In the same way, when we go through periods of delay and waiting, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for something far greater than we can see. The waiting may be uncomfortable, but it is part of the process that leads to God's perfect plan being fulfilled. In our lives, we may not always understand why we have to wait for God's promises. Maybe it's a job that hasn't come through, or a relationship that seems stalled, or healing that doesn't seem to be coming. But I want to encourage you to remember that God is still at work. When we are in the waiting, God is doing more than we can see. He is refining our hearts, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for the blessings he has in store. We must trust that his timing is better than our own, and that he will answer us at the right moment. The Apostle Paul also speaks to the power of trusting God's timing. In Romans 8:28, he writes, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." This verse is a reminder that everything in our lives, our delays, our waiting, our suffering, is being used by God for good. It doesn't mean that everything will be easy or that we will always understand the process, but it does mean that God is at work. The delays in our lives are not because God is distant or uncaring. They are because he is preparing us for something more. And when the moment arrives, we will be able to look back and see that it was all worth the wait. Another key aspect of trusting God's timing is learning patience. Patience is not just about waiting. It's about waiting well. It's about maintaining your faith and hope even when things don't look the way you want them to. James 5:7-8 says, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near." The farmer doesn't rush the process of growth. He waits patiently for the right time, knowing that the harvest will come when the conditions are right. In the same way, we must trust that God knows when the right time is for us to receive his blessings. We don't need to rush his process or try to make things happen on our own. In this world, we are often taught to push forward, to seize opportunities, and to take matters into our own hands. And while there is certainly a time for action, there is also a time for waiting. And when we wait on God, we are exercising faith. We are saying, Lord, I trust you. I trust that your plan is greater than mine. I trust that your timing is perfect, even when I don't understand it. And this kind of trust is what pleases God. As we reflect on God's perfect timing, we must also remember that He is never late. We may feel like we've been waiting for a long time, but God's timing is always on time. When the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, they cried out to God for deliverance. They waited for generations, but God's timing was perfect. When the moment was right, He raised up Moses to lead them out of Egypt and into the promised land. God's timing is always spot on, even when we can't see the whole picture. You may be facing your own season of waiting right now, and it can be difficult to trust that God is working in your life. But I want to assure you that He is. Just as He was at work in Joseph's life, and in the lives of the Israelites, He is at work in your life today. Trust Him, wait on Him, and know that He is preparing you for something beautiful. When His perfect timing arrives, it will be worth the wait. Have you ever felt like God's plan for your life is moving in slow motion? You've been praying for answers, trusting Him, and doing everything you believe He has called you to do. But it feels like the doors remain closed, the answers remain silent, and time continues to slip away. You wonder why the delay? Why does God not answer my prayers in the way I expect? Or when I expect? Well, my friends, I'm here to tell you that God's timing is perfect, even when it seems like nothing is happening. Let me share this truth with you. God's plan is never delayed. While we may look at time and feel as though things are taking longer than we expected, God operates outside of time. What may seem like a delay in our lives is merely a moment in His perfect plan that is unfolding in ways we may not yet see. Throughout Scripture, we see countless examples of God's people waiting on Him. Think about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. To them, it must have seemed like a never-ending journey, but God had a plan. In that waiting, He was teaching them trust, patience, and dependence on His provision. When the time was right, they entered the promised land, but they had to wait for God's perfect timing. It wasn't a delay, it was preparation. God wasn't punishing them. He was molding them into a people ready for what He had in store. Now, maybe you're facing something in your life right now. Maybe you're waiting for a breakthrough in your career, in your relationships, or perhaps in your health. You may be wondering, why hasn't God answered my prayers yet? Understand this. God's timing is not ours. He knows the end from the beginning, and He understands what we need and when we need it. He is the master of timing, and His timing is always perfect. When God seems silent or when His plan seems delayed, it's easy to feel discouraged. You start to wonder if God has forgotten you, if He's turned His back on your situation. But let me remind you of something crucial. God is never absent. He is always at work, even when we cannot see it. The psalmist tells us in Psalm 46, "One that a God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." That means that even in the moments when it feels like nothing is happening, God is working behind the scenes, setting things up in ways that we cannot comprehend. This is the faith we must hold on to, that God is at work in our lives, even in the delays. He is shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for something greater than we can imagine. In those moments of waiting, it is vital to remember that we are not just passive bystanders. We are active participants in God's plan, and how we respond in those waiting times is just as important as the eventual outcome. But there's more to it than just trusting that God's timing is perfect. In those moments of delay, we must learn to lean into Him. We must trust that He knows what is best for us. Proverbs 3:5-6 teaches us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." This is not just a nice verse to memorize. It's a blueprint for how we are to respond in the waiting times. When God's plan seems delayed, we must trust His wisdom. We must trust that He sees the bigger picture, and He knows what's best for us in the long run. Now, you see, while we often focus on the immediate, God is focused on the eternal. He's not just looking at today, He's looking at the end of the journey. He knows what is coming, and He is leading us step by step, day by day, toward His best for our lives. It's also crucial to understand that waiting doesn't mean inactivity. In the delay, God calls us to continue moving forward in faith. We continue praying, continue seeking Him, continue obeying His commands, and continue living out the principles of His Word. The waiting is not an excuse to be idle. It is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to deepen our relationship with God, to learn to trust Him more, and to prepare ourselves for the blessings that are yet to come. One of the most difficult things about waiting is the uncertainty it brings. We don't know how long it will take, what the outcome will be, or how God will answer our prayers. But here's the truth, my friends. We don't need to know all of those details. We only need to know that God is faithful. His word promises that He will never leave us or forsake us. Hebrews 13:5. And that's all we need. He is with us every step of the way. In the delay, God is teaching us to trust in His character. We may not see it right now, but He is working in ways that are beyond our understanding. Trust that He is faithful. Trust that He will fulfill His promises in your life. Trust that when the time is right, He will bring about His perfect plan. So, my friends, if you find yourself in a season of waiting, a season where God's plan seems delayed, don't give up. Keep trusting, keep believing, keep praying, keep praying. Know that God is at work in your life, and His timing is always perfect. He will move the mountains when the time is right. And when He does, you'll see that the waiting was not a delay. It was a preparation for the greatness He had in store for you all along. Remember, God has not forgotten you. He sees you, He loves you, and He is working all things together for your good. Hold on to that truth. Trust His timing and keep your faith strong. The waiting may be hard, but the reward will be worth it. Keep pressing forward, knowing that God's perfect plan is unfolding in your life, even when you cannot see it. His timing is always right, and He will never fail you. My friends, when we face delays in our lives, it's important to remember that God is never inactive. There may be times when it feels like nothing is happening, when we're stuck in a season of waiting or silence. But I want to tell you today that even in those moments when it seems like God has taken a step back, He is always working behind the scenes, orchestrating the details of our lives in ways we can't always see. God has a plan for your life, a plan that is filled with hope and purpose. And while we may not understand it all, we must trust that His ways are higher than our ways. In the book of Isaiah, God tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." Isaiah 55:8. This verse reminds us that God sees the full picture, and we see only a small part. There are times when we are unable to comprehend what God is doing, but that does not mean He isn't working. It's in the waiting that our faith is tested, and it's in those times that God is often doing some of His deepest work in us. Just think of the story of Abraham and Sarah. God had promised them a child, a son who would be the father of many nations. But Sarah, who had been barren for so many years, had to wait for God's timing. And as she waited, she grew older, and the circumstances became even more impossible. Can you imagine how she felt in that moment? The promises seemed so far off, and yet God was working behind the scenes. Sometimes, like Sarah, we too face seasons where the waiting seems unbearable. Perhaps we've prayed, we've hoped, we've trusted, but nothing seems to happen. The promises feel distant, and the answers to our prayers seem to delay. Yet, it is in these moments that we are called to trust in the faithfulness of God, who has never failed us and will never fail us. Abraham and Sarah's story did not end in disappointment. God fulfilled His promise to them, but it wasn't on their timetable. The Bible says in Genesis 21:1-2, "And now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as He had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what He had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him." That's the key. At the very time God had promised. You see, God's timing is perfect, even when it feels like nothing is happening. There's a reason for every delay, and there's a purpose in the waiting. God is working on something far greater than what we can understand. He may be preparing us for what He has in store, teaching us patience, strengthening our faith, and building our character. All of this is a part of His divine plan. In moments of waiting, when God's plan seems delayed, we must not allow our doubts to take root. We must trust that God knows exactly what He is doing. He knows the end from the beginning, and He is orchestrating everything according to His perfect will. We may not understand all the details, but we must rest in the confidence that God is good and that He has our best interests at heart. It's easy to grow weary during times of waiting, isn't it? I know many of you may be feeling that way today. You may be wondering why the breakthrough hasn't come yet, why the situation hasn't changed. But remember this, God does not work on our clock. We live in a world that is obsessed with speed, instant gratification, quick fixes, and immediate results. But God's ways are different. He is patient, and He is working in us to build endurance and perseverance. James 1:3-4 tells us, "The testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." There's a process to spiritual growth, and that process often involves waiting. The waiting is not just about receiving what we want. It's about becoming who God wants us to be. God uses the waiting seasons to shape us, to refine us, and to prepare us for what He has ahead. If everything came instantly, we wouldn't be prepared for the blessings that God wants to pour out on us. We wouldn't be able to handle the weight of His promises. But through the waiting, God is building a foundation of trust in Him. He is teaching us to rely not on our own strength, but on His. In the delay, God may also be teaching us the value of persistence. Jesus told His followers a parable about the persistent widow who kept coming to a judge with her request. Even though the judge was initially reluctant, the widow kept asking until He finally answered her petition. Jesus said, "And will not God bring about justice for His chosen ones, who cry out to Him day and night? Will He keep putting them off? I tell you, He will see that they get justice, and quickly." Luke 18:7-8. The lesson here is not that God is reluctant, but that He is teaching us to persist in prayer, to keep seeking Him even when it feels like nothing is happening. God is listening to every prayer, and He is responding in His perfect timing. Your persistence in seeking Him and trusting Him and in holding on to His promises is an act of faith that pleases Him. As you continue to trust God in the waiting, remember that the outcome will always be worth it. He has a plan for you, and that plan is good. You may not be able to see it now, but when God's timing is revealed, you will understand that the waiting was not in vain. Just like Abraham and Sarah, when the promise is fulfilled, you will see that God's timing was perfect all along. So don't give up. Don't grow weary. Keep trusting in God's perfect timing. Even in the delay, He is working. He is making you ready for the blessings that He has in store. You may not understand why things are taking so long, but trust that God is never late. Hold on, my friend. The wait is almost over. And when the time is right, you will see the beautiful fulfillment of God's perfect plan in your life. Keep trusting. Keep believing. God is at work, and in His perfect timing, He will bring His promises to pass. When you're caught in the storms of life, it's easy to wonder if God is paying attention. You may feel as if you're being swept away by the waves of trouble, the winds of adversity howling in your ears, and it may seem like God is nowhere to be found. But I want to remind you today that God is present in every storm. He is not distant or indifferent. Even when we cannot see His hand, He is at work in ways that we cannot understand. You see, life often brings us storms, difficult, troubling, painful circumstances that test our faith. Perhaps you're facing a storm right now. Maybe it's a financial struggle, a health crisis, a broken relationship, or the loss of someone you love. The storm may feel overwhelming, like it's threatening to drown you. But in the midst of that storm, God is still working. He is with you, and He is using this time to strengthen your faith and bring you closer to Himself. Remember the story of the disciples in the boat with Jesus. They were on the Sea of Galilee, and a great storm arose. The winds were fierce, and the waves were crashing over the boat. The disciples were terrified, and they cried out to Jesus, "O Lord, save us! We are going to drown." But Jesus, who had been sleeping in the boat, woke up and said to them, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And then He rebuked the winds and the waves, and immediately the storm was calm. Matthew 8:23-27. This is a powerful reminder that no matter how fierce the storm may seem, Jesus is in control. When He speaks, even the most violent of storms must obey. But notice that Jesus did not immediately calm the storm when it first arose. He allowed the disciples to go through the storm. He let them experience the fear, the confusion, and the uncertainty that comes with being in the middle of a storm, but he did not abandon them. And when the storm was at its worst, Jesus was right there with them. In the same way, God does not always remove the storms from our lives the moment they appear. Sometimes he allows us to go through difficult times, but he is always with us. He is using the storm to teach us to trust in his power, to rely on his presence, and to grow in our faith. The storms of life can be a refining process, a time of purification where God shapes us into the people he wants us to be. It's through the storms that we learn to depend on God more deeply and to lean on his strength rather than our own. But there's more to this story. When the disciples were in the boat with Jesus, they were not only learning to trust God in the storm, they were also learning to trust his timing. The storm didn't go away instantly. Jesus allowed them to feel the full force of the winds and the waves. Yet he was right there in the midst of the storm with them. And when the time was right, he calmed the storm. In your own life, God may not immediately take away the storms you face. You may feel like you're in the middle of a difficult season, waiting for the winds to calm, waiting for the waves to stop crashing. But I want to encourage you that God is not ignoring you. He is with you, and he knows exactly what you need. He will calm the storm in his perfect timing. His timing is always right, and when the time comes, he will bring peace to your heart and calm to your circumstances. The Apostle Paul understood this truth. In 2 Corinthians 12:7-10, Paul talks about a thorn in the flesh that he struggled with. He pleaded with God 3 times to remove it, but God did not take it away. Instead, God told Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul's response was profound. "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul learned that in his weakness, God's strength was made perfect. He learned to trust God even in the midst of his struggles, knowing that God's grace was enough to carry him through. When we face storms, it's easy to become discouraged, to feel like we're alone, or that God has forgotten us. But we must remember that our storms are not a sign of God's absence. They are an opportunity to experience his presence in a deeper way. God is not distant from you in your struggle. He is right there with you, offering his strength, his peace, and his grace. In the middle of the storm, he will never leave you nor forsake you. And just as the disciples learned to trust in God's timing, we must also learn to trust that God's timing is perfect. We live in a world where everything happens fast, instant gratification, quick answers, and rapid results. But God doesn't work on our timetable. He works on his own schedule, which is always perfect. His timing may not align with our desires, but it is always the right time. In the waiting in the storm, God is working in your heart. He is refining your faith, teaching you patience, and helping you grow in your relationship with him. It's through these storms that we learn to let go of our own control and trust in God's sovereign plan for our lives. He is shaping us, molding us, and preparing us for the future he has planned. So in the midst of the storm, don't give up. Don't lose heart. Trust in God's presence and his perfect timing. Just as Jesus was with the disciples in the boat, he is with you in your storm. And when the time is right, he will bring peace and calm to your life. Keep trusting him, for he is faithful. He will see you through the storm, and he will bring you to the other side stronger, wiser, and more trusting in his unfailing love. As we walk through life, we often find ourselves in the midst of trials, facing challenges that test our faith and our resolve. It's in these moments of uncertainty that we may begin to question the very nature of God's plans for us. We wonder why the storms of life seem to rage on, and why it feels like we are stuck, waiting for an answer that seems so far away. But I want to remind you of something profoundly important today. God's plan is always bigger than your immediate circumstances. He is never caught off guard. He never makes mistakes. His perfect plan for your life is unfolding, even in the midst of what feels like a delay. The delay you are experiencing may feel like a burden. It may be frustrating. It may even be disheartening. You've prayed, you've waited, you've hoped, yet still the answer seems delayed. The breakthrough hasn't come, and you're left wondering if God is truly at work. But let me tell you, God's timing is not like our timing. We live in a world where everything is fast-paced. We're accustomed to instant results, to quick fixes, and to immediate answers. But God's timetable is different. It's perfect, it's sovereign, and it's always for your ultimate good. Think of the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child when they were well beyond childbearing years. The promise was clear, but the timing was not. They waited, and they waited, and they waited. In the meantime, they made mistakes, trying to take matters into their own hands, trying to hurry up the process. But in the end, God fulfilled his promise in his time, and they rejoiced in the fulfillment of his plan. The lesson for us today is this: when God's plan seems delayed, trust that he is working in ways you cannot see, and in a timing you may not understand. Abraham and Sarah's story is not unique. The Bible is filled with examples of men and women who had to wait on God's perfect timing. Joseph, for instance, was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. He spent years in prison, wrongly accused, abandoned, and forgotten. Yet in the end, God used those years of delay to shape Joseph into the man he needed to be, to fulfill God's purpose in his life. Joseph's story reminds us that God is never wasting time, even when it feels like we are waiting without any clear end in sight. He is preparing us for something greater. When we find ourselves in a place where God's timing seems delayed, it's easy to become discouraged, to lose faith, and to wonder if God has forgotten us. But I want to encourage you to remember that God's delays are not denials. They are often a necessary part of his perfect plan. Sometimes God uses these delays to work in our hearts, to refine our character, and to strengthen our faith. Sometimes the waiting is not about what God is doing in our circumstances, but about what he is doing in us. Consider the story of David. God anointed him as king when he was just a young shepherd, but it was years before he actually became king. During that time, he faced incredible opposition. He had to flee from Saul, live in caves, and endure many trials. Yet God was using that time of waiting to prepare David for the throne. David's heart was shaped in those years, and when the time came, he was ready to step into the role God had prepared for him. In those years of waiting, God was building David's faith, teaching him to trust in God's provision, and strengthening him for the leadership that lay ahead. If you're in a season of waiting, I want you to know that God is not silent. He is not absent. He is working in your life in ways you cannot yet see. He is shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for what he has ahead. The delay is not a punishment. It is part of his loving plan. God knows the end from the beginning. He sees the big picture when we can only see the small, immediate moments of our lives. He is not surprised by the delays you face. He is not sitting back wondering how things will turn out. He has a perfect plan, and that plan includes the waiting. It's easy to get discouraged when we're in the midst of waiting. We wonder if the promises God has made to us will ever come to pass. We wonder if he really has a plan for us. But I want to remind you of this. God's promises are sure. He is faithful. He has never broken a promise, and he will not start with you. Even in the waiting, he is faithful to fulfill his word. The question is not whether God will keep his promises. It's whether we will trust him while we wait. Will we trust that his timing is perfect even when it doesn't align with our own? In Isaiah 55:8-9, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This passage is a reminder that God's perspective is vastly different from ours. He sees everything from beginning to end, and he knows exactly what we need and when we need it. He knows the plans he has for us, and they are plans for our good, even when it doesn't feel like it in the moment. So when God's plan seems delayed, remember this. Trust in his timing. Trust that he is working in your life, even when you can't see it. Trust that his delay is not a denial. God is shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for the great work he has ahead. And when the time is right, he will bring everything to fruition. In the waiting, he is teaching you to depend on him, to trust his faithfulness, and to believe that his timing is always perfect. When you trust in God's perfect timing, you will find peace in the waiting and joy in the fulfillment of his plan. As we conclude this message on trusting God's timing and his perfect plan for our lives, it is important to remember one crucial truth. The delay you are experiencing is not an indication of God's absence or disinterest in your life. Rather, it is a reminder that God's timing is always perfect. The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3, 11 is made everything beautiful in its time. This verse is a declaration of God's sovereign control over every aspect of our lives. It reminds us that there is an appointed time for everything, every trial, every season, and every blessing. And in each moment, God is at work, even if we cannot see it. There are times in life when we feel like we are in a holding pattern. We wonder why things aren't moving as quickly as we'd like. We may look around and see others receiving their breakthroughs, while we seem to be stuck in a season of waiting. In those moments, it's easy to feel as if God has forgotten us, that He is not paying attention to our needs or desires. But let me remind you that God's delays are not denials. Just because things are not happening on your timetable doesn't mean that God has abandoned His plan for you. Think about the life of Joseph. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned. For years, Joseph endured hardship, but through it all, God had a plan. His timing was perfect. Joseph's suffering was not in vain. It was preparing him for the purpose God had for him in the future. When the time was right, Joseph was elevated to a position of great authority, and his dreams were fulfilled in a way that only God could have orchestrated. Joseph's life is a powerful reminder that God is always at work, even when we can't see it. He is using every moment, every delay, every hardship to prepare us for what is to come. You may be facing a situation right now where you don't understand why God is allowing you to wait. You may have prayed for breakthrough, and yet it seems as though God is silent. But I encourage you to hold on to faith in the waiting. Trust that God is working behind the scenes. His silence is not His absence. His delay is not His denial. He is refining you, building your character, and preparing you for the blessing that He has in store for you. Remember, God is never late. He is always on time. In Psalm 27:14, the psalmist encourages us, wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Waiting on God requires strength and patience, but it also builds our trust in Him. When we wait on God, we acknowledge that He is in control and that His ways are higher than our ways. We let go of our own understanding and lean into His perfect wisdom. God is not bound by time. He stands outside of time, and He sees the beginning from the end. While we may be focused on the immediate, God is looking at the bigger picture. He knows what we need, and He knows the right time for everything. In the waiting, He is doing something in us, shaping us, molding us, and preparing us for what lies ahead. He is developing the character, strength, and endurance we need to handle the blessings that He has promised us. There is a verse in Isaiah 40:31 that brings great comfort to those who are waiting on God. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. This is a promise to all who trust in God's timing. When we wait on the Lord, we are not sitting idly by, hoping for something to happen. Instead, we are being renewed, strengthened, and prepared for what is to come. God doesn't waste our waiting. He uses it to grow us, to teach us, and to build our faith. In fact, the Bible tells us that suffering and trials can have a purpose. In Romans 5:3-4, Paul writes, "We also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, hope, and character, hope." When we go through difficult times and we are forced to wait, we are being refined. Our perseverance is strengthened, our character is developed, and our hope is anchored more firmly in the promises of God. The waiting is not just about the blessing we are waiting for. It is about the transformation that is taking place within us as we wait. You may be wondering, how can I endure this season of waiting? How can I keep trusting when I don't see any progress? The answer is simple. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. He is the source of your strength. He is the one who will help you endure. Hebrews 12:2 reminds us to affix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. When we focus on Jesus, we are reminded of His faithfulness and His power to bring us through any trial. We remember that He is in control and that His plans for us are good. The more we focus on Him, the less we will be consumed by the circumstances around us. God's timing is not always easy to understand, but it is always right. He knows the perfect moment to answer your prayers. He knows the perfect moment to bring breakthrough, healing, and restoration. And in the meantime, He is using the waiting to shape you, to strengthen your faith, and to prepare you for what He has planned. In the end, our hope is not in the timing of our circumstances, but in the faithfulness of our God. He is the one who holds our future in His hands, and He will never fail us. So, if you find yourself in a season of waiting, I encourage you to trust Him. Keep your faith in Him. Know that He is working on your behalf even when you cannot see it. And when the time is right, He will bring about His perfect plan in your life. Remember this: God's delays are not denials. They are part of His perfect timing. And when the waiting is over, you will look back and see how He has been working in every moment, shaping you, preparing you, and leading you to the fulfillment of His promises.